Well, the Solana network has had a big problem that has now been fixed, and it has to do with how we earn credits when validators are creating blocks. So at this point, we understand that a block gets proposed to the rest of the network by a leader, and our validators are meant to vote on whether or not to approve of that block. And the idea here is that the validator will earn credits for voting for blocks that get approved. The problem, so to speak, is that the validator, by voting on a block, has officially locked in to that block being the new tip of the chain. And that's well and good until the supermajority, the 2/3 of the validators in the rest of the network, disagree with that decision and they go a different direction built on other blocks. That means that this validator is going to face that dreaded lockout period and have to switch back to the other fork up here rather than continuing to ride the fork that it decided to vote on. So what this boils down to is the fact that we have an incentive for properly voting and we have a punishment for voting incorrectly. And that is supposed to be the incentive algorithm that helps our validators to want to make good decisions. But unfortunately, there's a pretty big flaw with this incentive philosophy. And the flaw is this: validators have no incentive to vote right when the block is proposed. So validators are going to start voting after a block is proposed, and at some point, 2/3 of the validators will have voted for that block. The question is this: what is the incentive to vote inside of this time period? And the answer is, outside of just being a positive contributor to the network, there isn't a good incentive. Validators have every motivation to wait until the 2/3 supermajority is done, then casting the vote, thereby ensuring that the validator doesn't accidentally create their own fork, and therefore their overall credits are going to rise. In fact, that means that since consensus happens in this time frame, that validators could never participate in consensus. They could always vote selfishly at the very end of the time period, and they could actually be one of the top contributors in the network. Feels a little backwards, doesn't it? They're being rewarded for being a non-contributor. But even worse than that, what if 1/3 of the network, again by stake, what if 1/3 of the network decides to perform this behavior here? Well, at that point, we would never actually achieve consensus, and therefore the network could grind to a halt. This would be the worst case scenario for the Solana network if all of the validators, or at least 1/3 of them, decided to act very selfishly. So how can we go about fixing this? Well, before we move on, I'd love to say that if this content is helping you, please give it a like and share it with a friend. And hey, stake some SOL on Lake Stake. We're grateful for every last Lamport. So how are we going to fix this? Well, before the network decided to put a fix in place, several validators decided that we're going to try to strike a balance here, because we want to achieve the benefits of delaying the votes, but we don't want the downside potentially of stopping the network, because the validators all benefit from the network operating and nobody wins if we get in a scenario where we actually halt production. So the idea here was that validators would download the Solana code and they would modify that code, deploying what we call mods onto the system. These mods change the default behavior of a Solana validator and programmatically allow the validator to introduce a delay to the voting. Now, unlike this halting scenario where we're all just waiting for 2/3 of the vote, instead, these delays would be based more on something along the lines of saying, I'll start voting for this block once it achieves 45% of the consensus. So we're not quite there yet. Remember, we need 2/3, so about 66%. So we're not waiting here, but we are going to wait until a block appears that it's going to be voted on. We're trying to maximize our credits by not voting on blocks that don't end up achieving a supermajority. And the best way to do that without risking halting the network is to do something like this. Now, the problem with this is that these validators, even if they're honest, they are taking advantage of a bad incentive program. Furthermore, there are still going to be some validators that are waiting to vote for this time period, meaning that they are counting on the honest validators to still achieve consensus for them, at which point they vote. And so we're still in that situation where the network has a flawed incentive algorithm. Furthermore, this is going to slow down the network. We're going to see longer wait times before blocks become confirmed. So fortunately, the Solana network has now deployed a solution to this incentive problem. And the solution is known as timely vote credits, or TVC. And TVC was recently deployed onto mainnet after a lot of testing on testnet. The idea here is that we want to map our rewards to the speed or how timely the vote is. Timely votes are going to get more credits. So now when we look at the time period for a slot, when the block is first proposed, we're going to get a lot more credits here at the start of this slot if we vote here versus if we vote here at the end, where we won't get as many credits. This is an absolute game changer for Solana because now the network and the validators have a mutually beneficial incentivization program here. If the network is doing well, now the validator does well, and if the validator doesn't properly contribute to the ecosystem, then it gets punished by producing fewer credits, which ultimately translates into less inflationary SOL earned per epoch. We also see that blocks move into the confirmed status much faster because we're going to find that the supermajority, that 2/3 supermajority, is going to be reached a whole lot sooner than it would have been under the old system where everyone was incentivized to delay votes. So if you like this video, please subscribe to the channel and always remember to stake at the lake.